think that one of the reasons that era caught our imagination is because there was no rules. Look at a 917 today and you think, wow, that's special, 250 miles an hour, oh my God. In 1969, there must have just been a spaceship. And I think that's why we love that, we love Can-Am. The Lola T70 made that formula accessible to a lot of drivers that maybe couldn't get a 917 or a 512, but are all bucket list cars, all three of them. The Ferrari 512S is dominated by the engine. The intake is right next to your head, even with earplugs in. I took my earplugs out first of all because I was told, don't wear earplugs. It was so painful, I came in, put earplugs in, and it was still full song, full noise. It makes the most beautiful noise, but that intake is right there dominating everything. You know, you sit in here and you look at that little rev counter and the little bubble that it sits in and this view round the screen, and in fact it's open. That was a little different actually. You got the mirror up here, so no side mirrors, so you got to look up to see what's going on. A little disconcerting turning in and not actually being able to look in a mirror and see if there's anybody steaming down your inside or not. And you look at the fuel tanks in the front and realise in period the guys were surrounded by fuel and think, crikey. This car has such a small steering wheel and it's quite heavy, especially as you kind of carry the brakes into the corner and you feel the front of the car loading up. You really feel the short wheelbase, especially through some of the quicker sweeps here at Donington. You can feel the car up on its toes a little bit. Be very careful with the inputs, whether it's lifting off the throttle, getting on the brake, and controlling the pitch of the car in those fast corners. To have to drive this thing on the limit, whether it was at Le Mans, Nürburgring, even the Targa Florio, God forbid, this thing would have been a beast. Well, this is the Porsche 917K. I guess it's the daddy of them all, isn't it? It's got such a fearsome reputation. And you get in the car, and look how reclined I am. And then you realise the back of the front wheel's right here. So the first sort of crash structure is actually my feet. It's a little disconcerting. And you look up and you see these tubes. And my bicycle's got bigger tubing than this. It is a 250 mile an hour car. It's terrifying. Then you start it with a key. No buttons, no histrionics, no fuel pumps on, and it's drilled to save weight. Typical Porsche, right? And the car's dominated by its driving position. You're so reclined in it, and you really drive it with your wrists. I mean, the steering is nearly twice the diameter of the 512S. So I think Porsche thinking more again about driver comfort, and it's easier to sort of to put those inputs in and to actually get some feedback from what's going on with the front tyres. The engine pulls like a locomotive. You feel the movement. When you accelerate, the car goes up, it's like a speedboat, and then you brake and it drops down and it dives, and you can really again control the pitch. How you enter the corner by how hard you brake and how late you brake and how long you stay on the brakes. The brake travel was quite long. I think the brakes need bled a little bit. Very, very long throttle travel. I think that was part of sort of a traction control in 1971, just giving you longer to think about it. But the engine is so tractable, so settled in the fast corners, certainly compared to the 512S with that short wheelbase. This car really loves those fast sweeps. You can see it being at home at Le Mans. It's probably a bit more challenged through somewhere like the Mulsanne corner. I think this car almost defies the numbers in the way it accelerates, and it accelerates from such a low RPM as well. And because there's no aero on it really. There's no drag, it just keeps pulling, it just keeps accelerating. And I think that's why it was such a mighty weapon on the Mulsanne. You look in the mirror there and you see that little bit, and you remember that bit from the film Le Mans with Steve McQueen when he did that. That's when it hits you. It's a special car. And it's one of those ones I would itch to race it, because I've enjoyed the experience so much and I keep learning things about it with every lap. But it's whether I would be brave enough, and that's the word that keeps coming back to me, whether I would have that sort of courage to do what was required to drive it at 10 tenths. I think there were very few people who could drive this car at the limit. The Lola T70 is underrated. I certainly underrated it before today. This car is a little different because the 917 and the 512S are kind of borderline museum pieces, where this is still campaigned. So it's a bit more sort of on the button, a bit more sorted maybe. Chassis-wise, it's fantastic. You can feel it rolls together. Heavy steering, even with this big steering wheel. A lot of weight in the wheel, but a lot of grip. A lot more grip than I thought. The driving environment looks quite similar, but it feels a lot different. It's more room, the steering is higher, closer to you. It's maybe more of a slightly more modern seat position than I'm used to, certainly less compromised than the 917 or the 512S. I would be a lot happier doing 24 hours in this. The one thing that maybe lets it down, if you want to call it that, the gearbox is very slow. You've got to be very, very careful with it. But to handle all that torque from the engine, it's probably a necessity. I think the handling, maybe the peak performance isn't quite there of the other cars, but it's more accessible. If you're being picky, maybe the engine lets it down a bit. I guess it was a cheap way to find a load of horsepower in its day. You know, this is a generation before the 512S and the 917, so from that point of view, I think with a bit more exotic lump in the back of it, it would have been really, really competitive. All that being said, you don't actually need a gear lever. It's got so much torque, it just pulls from nothing in that way that those big American muscle car engines do, and it just runts along. It's probably the surprise of the day for me, this car. It was so much fun to drive it. I think one thing all three cars had is you could really change the balance of the car a lot more because of the pitch of the car, because of the movement on the brakes, because of the movement on acceleration. You can really sort of play with the car a bit more and have more of an impact on what it's doing. They let you know when you exceed the limits, when you take some liberties, when you maybe go into the corner and carry a bit too much brake and you really feel that big lump trying to overtake the car. So you've got to be quite careful with it. But the guys that drove these in the wet at night for 24-hour, 12-hour races, the courage required to keep this thing nailed through the Mulsanne kink or over some of those jumps at Nürburgring would have been something quite special, I think.